Can join.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, thank you. So it is 1:05. I'm calling the September 5th, 2023 meeting of the Albemarle County Architecture Review Board to order. Carolyn, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Vanderwart,
Here.
Mr. Hancock,
Here.
Mr. Henningsen.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The public may access and participate in the meeting electronically. Instructions for doing so are posted on the Albemarle County website at the Albemarle County calendar. The public has real-time audiovisual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone, both as provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. This meeting is a public record and subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. All speakers, when it is your turn to speak, please state your name for the record. Applicants who are making presentations, note that your presentation is limited to a total of 15 minutes, which you can divide among your team members. Staff will let us know when the 15 minutes are up. If applicants in the meeting room have team members attending virtually who will need to present, please make that known when you come to the podium. Everyone who is participating virtually, please mute your microphone until it is your turn to speak. Do any ARB members have anything to disclose? No. No. I do. I have a time limit of 2:40. So if it gets close to 2:40, I will turn the reins over to Frank Hancock and abruptly get up and run out of the room. So we'll go to public comment. Are there any members of the public that want to make a comment about a project that is not on the agenda for review?
There's no one on the Zoom side.
All right, thanks a lot. We do not have any consent agenda items today. So we'll move to the regular review item. It is ARB-2023-70, Home Depot preliminary. Margaret, is the presentation ready?
Sure.
Thanks.
Wait for the play to change. While we're waiting for the display, I'll just note that there was an error in the staff report on the first page under proposal. It was a repeat of the last time you saw this. Today, you're not reviewing that outdoor storage and display, so sorry for that error. There we go. The subject of today's review is the proposed Home Depot store. As you probably remember, in May, you reviewed and recommended approval of the initial site plan for the project. In August, you reviewed and made a recommendation on the garden center and the outdoor storage and display proposal. So today you're reviewing the architectural design of the main store building for the first time, and also included is continued review of the site plan. As a reminder, the site is located at the north end of the Fashion Square Mall, where the Sears store is currently located. The site falls within two entrance corridors. That's Route 29 to the west of the site and Rio Road on the north, and the site is visible from both of those corridors. You've seen these images before. These are relatively recent photos from the Rio Road corridor. Rio is elevated approximately 20 feet above the site, and that allows for views down onto the property. This is a view from Route 29, and from here, the site is elevated above the entrance corridor street. This is the overall site plan for the project. In this slide, the orientation is 29 to the left and Rio at the top. The garden center is also at the top of the slide, and it probably looks familiar. All the display areas that were proposed are along the front of the building in the garden center. So again, the architecture of the main store building is really the primary topic for today. The top elevation is the one that faces Route 29. It shows the store with the garden center at the left. The middle elevation is that same store elevation without the garden center. And the bottom elevation is the one that faces Rio Road, and it shows the garden center between the main store building and the corridor. The proposed building form is a big box. That form and the proposed design treatments are clearly contemporary, and they do not reflect the traditional architecture of the area. However, the building form and scale are generally consistent with the remaining mall building. Note, however, that the mall predates the establishment of the corridors. It does not comply with the guidelines, and it will likely be replaced at some point in the future. The building's deep setback from Route 29 and its position below Rio Road help reduce visual impacts. And as indicated in previous reviews, landscaping that meets the guidelines can help harmonize this non-traditional development with the overall corridors. It can help offset visual impacts and support unity and coherence along the corridors as called for by the guidelines. The elevation facing Route 29 is a long one, and it's broken up by the main store entrance and the lumber canopy, and by changes in color. There are also changes in texture and some material changes proposed, but the color is what will be noticed from the corridors. Incorporating architectural features that are noticeable from the street to help break up the mass rather than relying solely on color would be appropriate. The methods of breaking up the building mass don't really achieve a human scale for the building. Additional architectural features and detailing could be used to better establish that human scale and relieve blankness. And we made a few suggestions in the staff report to that end. And they include extending that beam that's above the main entrance to create a canopy, as seen in the example provided in the submittal. And that would not only provide protection, weather protection, but could also add visual interest in human scale and help reduce blankness. Providing vertical supports for the extended canopy, which are also shown in the image in the submittal, would further establish human scale and a connection to historic architecture. We've also noted that the entrance features share some design elements, and we've recommended revising the piers and the siding element of the lumber canopy to match the main entrance for a more coordinated appearance. Moving on to the Rio Road elevation, only the upper part of that elevation on the main store building is expected to be visible above the garden center. That portion of the wall really has no architectural detailing. The plan at this point doesn't show it, but rooftop equipment is expected on the building. Given the elevated position of Rio Road, it's anticipated that standard parapet walls will not provide sufficient screening. The bottom image in this slide shows a typical store with the rooftop equipment. So we've recommended that the standard information be added to the drawings to show how visibility of the equipment will be eliminated. Cut sheets for light fixtures were included in this submittal. Lighting information is not complete, however. So we've made a few recommendations in the report to address that. And then finally, landscaping is also part of this review. You previously discussed landscaping along Rio Road. Trees and shrubs there can contribute to screening of the garden center and the storage and display. As a reminder, it was determined previously that the buffer alternative that's shown on the plans was not appropriate. You also considered landscaping along the Route 29 frontage relative to outdoor storage and display. Staff had recommended that entrance corridor frontage trees be provided, given the extent of the redevelopment that's proposed. Your decision was to recommend a condition requiring the standard planting or an acceptable alternative within the existing planting area. The guidelines also call for interior parking lot trees, perimeter parking lot trees, trees along internal roads, trees along pedestrian ways, and trees to soften long building elevations. The layout of this site is such that some of the tree types would double up. For example, an interior parking lot tree might also count as a pedestrian way tree. But at this point, only the interior tree count appears to meet requirements. That's assuming you're not looking at the lot in that's closest to Route 29. So while there may be some double counting of trees available, additional trees are still needed to meet requirements. So we've recommended several revisions to the site and to the architecture. Those could be provided with the final site plan submittal. I would be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thanks a lot, Margaret. We'll go into questions. Frank, do you have any questions?
Just one question. The last drawing we were looking at, Margaret, what does the yellow line represent? It was outlining some of the parking areas. Not this
The
drawing.
yellow line that you're looking at right now,
No, on the last drawing. Yes.
sidewalks.
Okay. But the property line for this is shown along 29, is that correct?
This is the property line is what's shown in yellow on this side.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I don't have any additional questions.
Thanks. Dave, do you have any questions?
I don't believe so. Thank you, Margaret, for clarifying the landscape revisions requested at the last meeting. Those will be the subject of a future application for the site and not included in the architecture today.
I think everything will be caught up with when a final site plan is submitted.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I do not have any questions. So if the applicant has a presentation, now is the time.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Valerie Long with Williams Mullen. We're representing the applicant, Home Depot. We have a number of members of our team here today. So just so you know, we do have our project architects here from MG2, as well as John Karakis with Greenberg Farrow. They both work on a number of Home Depots around the country. My colleague Megan Nadostup is here, as well as David Ellington with Kimley Horn, our civil engineer. So we do have some slides. I'll maybe go through some of them. A lot of them you will have seen. I think Mr. Hancock, since you weren't here when we were here a month ago on the outdoor storage and display. So we included them since you wouldn't have seen those. And then I'd like, if it's okay, have the architects come up and talk more about comments 1 and 2 about the building design itself and the mechanical equipment screening elements. We need to switch the screens. There we go.
Here we go.
Sorry, operator error, pardon me. Okay. So we have a lot of the views from the various entrance quarters too. Most of these were taken within the last few months just with cameras. This is obviously an area of discussion along Route 29, and we have some additional photos. That area in, where there's no screening, there actually used to be very mature trees there before the grade separated interchange project was built, when those trees were removed and a retaining wall was installed. I'll show you that in a minute. This is obviously one of the main entrances into the center from Route 29. Mr. Hancock, you asked about the yellow lines. Those are all new sidewalks that are being added. So including along this drive aisle here. This is views from Rio Road entrance corridor. Obviously, it is a challenge to manage the redevelopment of this site, given the difference in elevation between Rio and the project site itself. The Home Depot building will be about 9.5 feet taller than the existing Sears building, which we think will help quite a bit with the eliminating the visibility of the mechanical equipment. Is going to still be a challenge from the highest point on Rio, and our architects are going to talk more about that. This is from the entrance as you were if you were turning into the mall from Rio Road. We want to just show the existing landscaping that's there. All of that will be retained, And then we're proposing additional landscaping pretty much anywhere that there's space to add landscaping where it's not already there. This is one of the most challenging areas. You can see on the left, very tall and mature trees, which help mostly eliminate or certainly mitigate the visibility of the development site from the road. But of course, the pedestrian path, it's much more challenging. We do have our plantings plan along Rio, plantings there that will certainly fill in most of that. But, and we have some renderings we can show you. And then again, this is just a little bit more close up looking and sort of here's what the existing conditions are. Obviously, almost no, if no interior parking lot trees, that sort of thing. So the new site would have to meet those guidelines. This is probably the most challenging view with regard to rooftop mechanical equipment. So when we talk about that most challenging view, this is the highest point on Rio. Now, this is obviously taken from the pedestrian sidewalk. It's a little bit different, of course, from the westbound drive lanes. But I just wanted to highlight that. Margaret showed these. We can come back to these as needed. We have some closer up shots if that would be helpful. We can refer to. Again, the architects will talk more about this, but we wanted to just add to point out that the roof line is this dashed line and the parapet is above it. It does angle a little bit. The roof slopes back towards the back away from the front of the building. And likewise here, I think it's about 8 feet tall, I believe the parapet was on this end, and it goes down to a foot or two on this other end. But we highlighted where the rooftop equipment is proposed so that, you know, to demonstrate that it will be not higher than the parapet roof. These are some renderings that we showed last month with regard to how the garden center looks attached to the building and the outdoor display areas. This is an image from, as it says, October of 2014. All those trees you see in the foreground, this is of course Route 29, looking south. All of those trees you see in the foreground were removed as part of the project to widen Route 29 and add the grade separated interchange at Rio and 29. So I'll show you a second picture from the exact same spot. Actually, this is an elevated image. You can see here, the area in question is all here where they took the trees out. And then there's a retaining wall that's under construction in this location. So that's why it's challenging. That's why I think the reason there's no trees that were returned is because the area is also full of utility easements. This is an image of that same location there today. So obviously the retaining wall, and then further to the south on the road is where it's just grass is where those trees used to be. There's a lot going on in this image. This is has Route 29 on the top of the page. We show this area. This is from an Alta survey that was prepared recently, showing all of the utilities in that area. The highlighted area in green is the one area when we were here a month or so ago and talked with you about our desire to put trees in that location, but the limitations, we already knew that we had a tight amount of space between the red line, which is the right-of-way line, and the curb, which we didn't want to tear up yet, because we know that will be redone as part of the second phase of redevelopment of the mall. We'd hope to be able to use this entire green strip, but there's a county service authority easement here. There's utility easements when the project was done that VDOT reserved the right. We hope to be able that VDOT will let us put some small plantings in this area, but we do have to get their permission. But that would be the extent of the area that we have to work with. This is image of our site plan with regard to, I think it was comments number 10 and 11 about providing more trees along Fashion Square Drive to supplement what is there already. To meet the standards of 40 feet on center, there's not a lot of room for that. Each one, of course, would eliminate a parking place we still have to get Home Depot's permission to this, but we think we could fit 2 trees in that location that would each eliminate 1 parking space. Sorry, let me back up. That would get about 50 feet on center, so closer to compliance with the guidelines. And then 2 additional trees in this location. This is the front of the store for reference. And this is an example of the Costco store. I think pardon me, let me back up one step. This, for lack of a better word, we're calling it a spine sidewalk through the middle. It's always challenging with infill development like this. We're not starting with you know, raw canvas in order to work. We really want to add this spine sidewalk, but in order to comply with the guidelines to have trees along sidewalks at 25 feet on center, we would have to widen this area substantially and then add landscape islands all along the way, much like this, which is the newish now Costco. Obviously, they had a greenfield site. They had more room to work with. This would, to satisfy this standard, would require about 6 additional feet on either side of that spine sidewalk, which would require eliminating an entire double row of parking. So we're asking for your support and a little flexibility on that guideline so that we can have the plan look like this, still have room for that spine sidewalk, which we think is important coming from Route 29 to connect pedestrians to the store. But if we have to meet that guideline, we would lose this entire row of parking. We can't go beyond this line, which is the property line. Belk owns everything here. So we're trying to work within the area that we have and get as close to the guidelines as possible. And maybe this is just showing, again, closer up of some of the existing proposed landscaping. This, for Mr. Hancock's benefit, we showed last week. This is the proposed planting plan roughly along Rio. There is a condition of approval, the outdoor storage and display, that there be greater variety in the plantings here, which were, as was noted with our next submittal, that would be incorporated. But again, let me go back, showing that, again, we're adding trees and plantings wherever there is space. It is tight in this area because it's a pretty steep slope down to the parking lot. We showed you this view already. We have some renderings trying to demonstrate. Obviously, this is without much, really no landscaping. We do think there is a tree right here that provides a little bit of screening right in this area. But you saw from those other images, there's not much screening there now. But based on, you know, what we're proposing at full maturity, it would be substantially screened. And then likewise, the view from Rio on this end with the plantings proposed, it will help break up the visibility fairly well. And then likewise from this location for pedestrians walking along at full maturity there. If I may, I will ask the project architects to come up and talk with you a bit about building design, rooftop equipment, and so forth. This is Dan Boyle with MG2 Architects.
Hey, how's it going? Where there comes.
What do you mean this?
Do you have them there?
You can pick mine. Sure. Yeah, I don't have them on the screen. I think that was, Margaret had them on the screen, if that would be helpful, or I think it would be helpful for either.
Yeah, this works.
Okay.
Thank you. So yeah, in response to the staff comments, I just wanted to address a few of those here. You know, you guys called out the Lower Heights location we recently built. We're very proud of that project in Houston, Texas. It's a great project. I think we can use a lot of those strategies here. As you pointed out in the recommendations, there's some changes there to the canopy, which I think we can look at adding here. So that's a great way to increase the human scale of the entry there. Adding the piers, again, that's a direct thing we can take from that project, I believe. And again, in that project also, we're showing some trellis elements along the front of the building, which will help to increase the human scale there. So basically, I think we can take your recommendations directly, should be able to accommodate all of those. You know, we came with a round one revision and we appreciate the comments. You know, we're here to have a dialogue on it. So we absolutely hear all those comments. I think on that front, we can pretty much come back with what you're asking for there, for all of those elements. For the second comment is discussing the roof plan in order to look at rooftop equipment. I did want to mention, as Valerie had said, on the elevations here, we do actually show the rooftop units. They're behind the parapet, so it may not be super clear in the elevations that we had submitted, but she had called this one out here with some additional lines on it. So we do show 2 lines of rooftop units, which are behind the parapet. This parapet goes to 32 feet on this side. So we're increasing the height of compared to the Sears, we're increasing the height of the building by 10 feet. This roof slopes back, which helps us a lot to conceal the rooftop units. We're at 3 feet below the parapet on the front side of the building by Route 29, and we go back down to over 8 feet at the rear. So it's a pretty big slope, and there's a lot of room back there for some of the rooftop units to be hidden behind. Also to that point, from the existing views on Ryer Road, we're basically increasing the building height by 10 feet. So that moves, if you look at any of these perspectives, that's going to move the parapet height up above the viewer's eye line, which gives us a lot more room as you recede past the parapet to hide things because there's that angle of your perspective. And I think that helps a lot in addressing that comment. As regards to the third comment, I think the language is very strong there. So as Valerie pointed out, we do have this rear corner, which is very difficult. So I can't 100% know exactly what that looks like from here. But we are adding that additional landscaping, which I think combined with the increased parapet height goes a long way towards reducing the visibility as much as feasible. Is there any questions on any of that?
We'll just go through and see if board members have any questions. Dave, do you have any questions for the applicant?
I guess just to appreciate the additional emphasis on the landscape and the screening that may provide, and also the description of the parapet. I think for future reference, it may be helpful if y'all could develop some site sections that would demonstrate whether they're visible. I think my understanding is the guideline is written to require the elimination of any visibility. And so I think that's the standard that we're working with under the current guideline. Appreciate very much the mitigation and the reduction that the strategies that you've described will provide. Secondly, appreciate the willingness to adopt and incorporate staff's good comments about human scale. I don't know that they went as far as suggesting a couple other steps, but I think my understanding is the elevations are largely flat and there are differences in color between panels. This is an open question. Are there any opportunities to add relief, scale, shadow to further accentuate those differences in that scale measure?
Yes, so I think that partly the existing canopies, which we would increase per the recommendations, do add some element of that, but further, and maybe I didn't mention this as much, one of the things that is shown in the lower heights location, and which we can certainly look at repeating here, is trellis elements that are in front of the building, and they do add shadow to the building. It goes back to human scale again, because it's right around the ear height rather than being 32 feet tall. But it adds that element of something in front of the actual building facade, which of course is very flat, being a concrete building.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, Dave. Frank, do you have any questions?
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. It's especially helpful to see the diagram of the planting area along 29, kind of color coded, what's available, what's not. Still understand though, there's restrictions on the area that was green and shown that it's available for planting, but under the purview of VDOT. Is it a clear zone or there's some sort of easement there that there might be restrictions? Sorry to make you get up. But
It's just fine. We're happy to answer it. The easement that is of record says you can put some plantings there with VDOT's permission. So we expect it'll be a matter of proposing something very specific in that area, sharing it with VDOT and getting their response back.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
it may be that it would be a temporary plantings until, again, what we call phase 2 redevelopment of the mall occurs. Then those those might stay, but as that parking lot in front, you go to that. As this area redevelops with the next phase of the mall, there would be much more room to meet the guidelines inside the property line, but beyond the utilities. And so maybe even if those are probably not enough space to do much in that area, more would be available with the second phase.
Thank
So,
you.
But
And
it
then-
is challenging.
Yes. The other question I had, the spine sidewalk that I guess goes from
Mhm.
Home Depot to 29. Is that a requirement? Is there a requirement in the site plan or anything to add that sidewalk?
No, we're trying to add as much pedestrian connections. Perhaps there may be some discretion on site plan reviewers' part to require that. I know they have more discretion than they have in the past, but we really wanted to try and as much as possible show a direct connection to Route 29 if possible.
I appreciate that. And I think just off the top of my head, since it's not a requirement, I don't know that we need to hold it to the same standard
Yeah.
as the Costco example, but that's just my initial thought on that. I think having the connection is more important. And then apologize, I missed the outdoor storage review. Thank
Okay.
you for catching me up.
Sure.
There are some restrictions there as well, right? Is there overhead power along
Yes.
Rio? I believe there's some small trees and then the kind of the line of the similar or the same symbol closer to the road. Are those all like large shrubs or small trees?
So these trees are all down below next to the new parking lot edge there. Everything shown here is what we could fit into that area beyond the overhead power line easement, but also again, it slopes down pretty steeply. So we tried to do as much as we could within that area, but there's two guardrails. There's a guardrail right next to the road, drive aisle, and then there's trees. Let me go back to the original images that I find helpful. So you've got the road, obviously you have the sort of road guardrail, then you have these large mature trees, sidewalk, and then a second guardrail, and then it slopes down pretty steeply. So what we've tried to do is as much as possible, fill in at least with some small shrubbery, and then also mixed in with something a little bit larger there. We did, and for your benefit, Mr. Hancock, we knew from the beginning this was going to be the most, this angle and then the one in the opposite direction would be the most challenging to mitigate the views of both the store itself as well as the rooftop equipment. One of the options we proposed, and we didn't really expect anyone to want this, but we did look at it and say, well, if they really don't see anything, we could build a wooden fence. So that was a proposal we put forward. It was very clear at our last meeting that was not preferred, which is fine with Home Depot. It's just a matter of, again, trying to show that they're going to do everything they can with the area they have to work with, but it'll just remain challenging. So with like all infill development, when you're dealing with existing utility lines and strange topography and, working with old building standards like this. So like the sidewalk, we thought that sidewalk was more important as well, having it, even if it didn't quite meet those guidelines.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure.
And then the only other comment I would make, I echo Dave's comment or suggestion that maybe we have a section or a perspective, showing the rooftop equipment
Okay.
and the relationship between that and Rio Road. That's
Sure.
the one thing that gives me pause is.
Yep.
We
We understand that makes sense.
Yeah,
Sure.
how close are those units to the parapet wall, and the building's coming closer to Rio than the existing building.
A little bit.
A little
The
bit.
garden
Center, maybe. that's
Mostly,
right.
yeah.
Okay,
So, yep, we
I
can
think
do
it
that.
can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. And I just have one question about the another Rye Road mechanical equipment question. If the proposed parapet doesn't work out, is there kind of a plan B for how to hide the mechanical equipment? Just because it's that grade change is
Sure.
pretty difficult.
I'm gonna let them come up and they can obviously talk with more expertise and eloquence than I can on those things. Let me go to that elevation page to work from. I know they've educated me that I said, well, can't you just make the parapet 10 feet taller? You all will appreciate that the challenges with that, but Dan can perhaps discuss a few more strategies they have been thinking through.
Sorry, I said. I think what we can do is, you know, look at the site study that we'll prepare as part of the response to this other comment. And see how much, if at all, we have to raise the parapet here to make that work. That would be the strategy, is to raise it. Maybe we can raise it in parts and not other parts to create some visual interest there, but I think that would be how we would address that. That would be the best way. I know that adding screening around the units is not preferred. So look at incorporating it into the building design itself.
All right, great. Well, thank you. All right. So are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment?
I don't have anybody on my side. I don't have anybody out on the Zoom side.
All right, great. Thank you. There
Mhm.
doesn't appear to be any in-person commenters. So the ARB will now go into discussion. So I'll just ask, Frank, do you have any comments or?
Sure, I appreciate the applicant's willingness to work to address staff's comments. Sounds like they're amenable to making some revisions. I don't really have anything to add on top of that. Probably echoing what I said the first time this came to the ARB. I think it's a nice redevelopment project. I appreciate the connection, albeit very, very far in distance from the building to 29. I think that's important. That the applicant's doing something that's not required there. I think we'll be focused in on that view from Rio on any of the mechanical equipment, the visibility there. So whatever the applicant can do to adequately address that or visualize that, I think would be super helpful. But all in all, I think it's a nice application.
Thanks. Dave, do you have any comments?
I echo Frank's, appreciate the applicant's willingness to work to meet staff comments, and also do appreciate the detailed study of the landscape strip in front of 29. So look forward to the next submission.
All right, thanks. I agree. I look forward to seeing the next submission, and I thought it was you know, a good start, and I'm glad that the applicant's willing to kind of go with staff and staff comments. So.
Are you ready to look at the list of
Yeah.
recommendations? While we're waiting for that to come up, I'll just point out that the site plan ordinance does require pedestrian connections, not necessarily in the exact locations that are shown. I don't know if Mariah wants to add anything to that.
As Valerie said, it leaves it up to the site plan reviewer. In this case, we would be requiring the pedestrian connections to connect to the entrance corridors and build in that internal network and safe connections.
This it looked like there were two sidewalk connections. There was that direct connection that you saw go kind of north-south on the page, and then there was the one that went kind of around, I guess, Fashion Square Drive. Did the Fashion Square Drive sidewalk meet the requirements?
The ones that we would be looking most at would be, and this is again, some subjectivity up to the site plan reviewer, which is me. Full disclosure. We'd mostly be looking at a connection from the building to Rio Road and to Route 29. The advantage in the frontage or the Fashion Square Mall Drive is it provides a cut through to pedestrians that are trying to go from the higher Rio Road elevation to the lower Route 29 elevation without, if they are not going to Home Depot. So it was a really advantageous and generous connection by Home Depot.
Great. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if one of those sidewalks met the requirements and then the other one didn't, then to me, that would give a lot more kind of leeway in terms of how to treat that second path, kind of as Frank mentioned previously, like, it's
Mhm.
almost less of a sidewalk and just a walkway, I guess you could say.
Right, so the trees along pedestrian routes, I believe is an ARB requirement, not a site plan requirement. Oh, that there are sidewalks is a site plan requirement. The planting requirement along them is an ARB requirement. I would say that there's an advantage to designing pedestrian ways a little differently, because when you're at the entrance to a building, and I think we've all experienced this, and you're trying to locate your car or a safe travel way, it's nice for that pedestrian way to look a little different. But again, it's two requirements coming together, or requirements from different areas coming together.
Right, thanks.
So on the screen are the 14 recommendations that were in the staff report. I've just added to number 2, the text in red provides sections or perspectives related to the rooftop equipment.
I guess for item 10, we didn't discuss the applicant's proposal to put the trees in at 50 feet on center. That seemed reasonable to me just because there were, I think, some closer than that on center, maybe at the corner, so that in aggregate, they'd be average 40 feet on center. I don't know whether Frank and Chris, you thought that seemed acceptable.
I thought, yeah, that basically the diagram that was provided like seemed like a reasonable solution to me, at least.
I agree.
And to item 11 and what we were just discussing, I think, as Mariah points out, I think not only does it look different, but also practically having some shade in the middle of that kind of spot makes a pedestrian route much more tenable and comfortable. But I don't know. I appreciated your remarks, Frank. I don't know. Do you and Chris have thoughts about number 11 and whether any revision is necessary?
Yeah, 25 feet on center. I mean, that how it's written in the guidelines. Apologize, I don't have that memorized.
It is.
Seems tight. But I guess maybe it doesn't call for large trees. Maybe those are smaller trees. I would imagine maybe the applicant would look to some existing routes to show maybe the requirement, and we might end up losing that sidewalk, which would be unfortunate. Because I think that's a nice to have that direct connection, but I don't want to go against our guidelines if that's might be
Right,
something we need to leave in this comment, and we can see how the applicant comes back.
I think it would make sense to leave it in, and once we get a full landscape plan with all the details, it'll be easier to assess the overall impact and determine whether or not that one can be let go.
A good point.
All right, any additional tweaks?
I guess the only small one to item 10 would be whether we wanted to say consistently at 40 feet on center with the exception that two trees may be placed at 50 feet on center and the locations noted today. Not suggesting a wholesale relaxation, but just
Just an exception in that.
an exception that was
One there,
acceptable,
yeah,
right?
That makes sense.
I'm
Very
sorry, could
specific.
you repeat what, how you'd like
Um,
that to be?
I guess with the exception that the two locations noted as 50-foot spacing by the applicant in today's presentation are acceptable.
So a question for number one, are you okay with the sort of the general comment there, or did you want to make any specific recommendations? Or any specific additions?
What is your recommendation? I think the applicant seems to be willing to incorporate the suggestions in the staff report. Do you want to include specific reference to those, or would you recommend that? Or
I think we could, there were also a few suggestions made today, so maybe just as referenced in the staff report and in the meeting.
and in the meeting, that sounds good.
Yeah. Do we need a motion or does this?
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
Yes, Valerie?
If we may, regarding number 10, if I could be permitted to show our exhibits again, there, I think we're at least 4 locations.
Okay.
And if possible, we'd love it to maybe reference what we show on the plan.
Sure.
But if I could put those back
Yeah.
up, I think we need to switch screens again, maybe, or maybe not, actually. Let's see, where is that? Okay, so because it covered a couple of different
Okay.
slides.
Got it.
So there were 2 that we identified we could put here, and that would close that gap to close to 50. And then 2 more in these locations. Then there was a third area where we could put 2 new trees, but we may not have it on here. They were, I think it's right up in here. That also is part of Fashion Square Drive. We really looked anywhere there was a space where there wasn't a tree now. Could we add more in to kind of make up for where maybe it's a little short in other areas? We do have an exhibit that would show them here. We still have to get Home Depot's approval for this because each of those does eliminate a parking space. But if that's something that would address that and be acceptable, that would help us.
So then that would be referencing what sheets 17 and 18 of the presentation?
Yeah.
Or
And then we'll show these trees here. There were 2. Is that the right? Am I pointing in the right area? Yes. Thank you.
So then just to clarify, so all those trees in those 2 areas, technically we would consider those interior parking lot trees. So they'd be doubling as your travelway trees, your sidewalk trees, perimeter trees. Or is what's shown there, are you satisfied with that? No additional trees? You're okay with the trees being sort of double and triple counted?
guess
I'm-
I may not have been as aware of that. I had understood that these were meeting one requirement. I guess, Margaret, can you quantify overall the number of trees you say, or you think we are?
Quantified? No, I cannot.
No.
give
Okay.
a number.
I think
Um,
my intention in that exception was if these are travel way trees, right, that's the requirement of the 40 feet.
That is.
Yeah, that for travel way trees, that was acceptable. I didn't mean to be saying that I wasn't evaluating interior parking lot or other trees in that context.
Okay. So I don't know if the applicant has additional comments or concerns on that, because yeah. Good potential for additional parking spaces would have to be removed to
To
meet the
ultimately
numbers.
satisfy requirements. And that is something that normally we will be reviewing as part of the site plan. I know we're kind of combining here because this is officially an architectural review.
Well, it was architecture plus continued site plan
Okay.
review.
Okay.
But I mean, at this point, it may be worthwhile just to leave the well. I think we need to switch to the yeah.
So I guess my comment would have been that if we put travel way in front of trees. That was my understanding of the issue, but I don't know, Frank, Chris, if you see it different.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because it's a retrofit and we're meeting up with like, we're calling it an interior drive. I mean, it's essentially a drive aisle, a parking lot and spaces. I don't know. I don't know that I would hold it to that same standard of like an interior road or interior. What's the language in the design guidelines? Is it interior travel way or is it interior road?
Interior road.
Has a name, but it doesn't really feel like a road to me. Yeah, I think by us leaving this comment in, I think it's still an issue for the applicant to address. In looking at that exhibit, it looked like there was a little bit of room maybe to add some trees that weren't necessarily parking lot trees, but that were adjacent to the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the curb. So I would encourage the applicant to look at those spaces. But given this conversation, I think maybe we'd be a little lenient on that because the definition of a road is maybe a little nebulous here with whether it's a drive aisle or a real road and if you zoom out and look at the amount of trees that Home Depot is adding, I think that it's going to have an impact, especially considering what's there now. But I appreciate the clarification. Sometimes you do end up double counting and you just run out of space because you're also competing. I don't think anything is really shown on this exhibit, but you're competing with a bunch of utilities. There's going to be storm lines running through here. And so hopefully from this conversation, we want a lot of landscaping at the ARB. And I think the applicant is trying to put it wherever they can. But it is, we can't go against the guidelines because we'll be, taken to task by the next applicant that comes up and says, well, we went and looked at the Home Depot and that's what happened there.
Yeah, I think those comments are helpful. Just want to make sure everybody, has the same expectation. So I think if we leave 10 and 11 in as they are now, you'll have another opportunity to review a complete landscape plan. And I think this helps just emphasize your point that trees are maybe double and triple counted, but as many as possible is the goal.
Yes, yeah, and like the applicant was showing trees at, where they weren't really touching Fashion Square Drive that was coming in, I think was coming in off 29, so they're adding trees there. So anything like that, I think we're willing to work with you. We're not going to sit there and say every 40 feet or 30 feet, so.
So technically, this is a preliminary review. Traditionally, what you've done for preliminary reviews is just come to consensus on the comments and provide them to the applicant without a motion. But if you prefer to make a motion, that would be fine as well.
Happy to stick with our past practice.
Yeah. We don't need a motion then. Move anything. All right, so in that case, I guess there's no motion, no vote.
think
So thank you. I guess if the applicant doesn't have any other questions or comments, we'll move on.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, so we'll move on to our work session. We have one work session today, which is on the EC design guidelines, Route 649. All right, has a presentation.
Margaret's going to be driving today. The cord isn't long enough to stretch to my computer, so yes. So thank you again, everyone, for your continued work on the effort to identify common elements and historic aspects along each of the county's entrance corridors. Today, we have a draft of Route 649 Airport Road for your review. This corridor is a short one with a length of 0.7 miles. The corridor demonstrates a range of development, which hints at its underlying zoning districts in the area that include industrial, residential, commercial, and rural. Most developments along the corridor predate the establishment of the entrance corridor design guidelines, which is evidenced by unregulated parking, a lack of frontage landscaping, and buildings oriented away from the corridor. Exceptions to this include Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Sheets. Overall, there's an open character to the corridor with its broad street width emphasized by open space and deep setbacks. Although this allows for distant mountain views in both the east and west directions, coupled with the preponderance of adjacent parking lots, automobile-related businesses, and the lack of trees near sidewalks, the corridor has an auto-oriented character. As usual, we included a list of predominant structural and landscaping elements, as well as a list of features to maintain and avoid. Some of the unique aspects along this corridor were more complex building forms seen in churches as opposed to other buildings, and continuous sidewalks, but a lack of street trees. In the precedent images, we show existing development examples, most having deep setbacks, but across different uses. And unique to other corridors, a designed gateway to the entrance to the airport road entrance corridor in the form of a low stone wall with signage on both street sides that curve inward towards the corridor, which is seen in the bottom right image. Well, tried to. It's very small.
Got the red.
That is the red.
Yeah.
I tried other colors, but it kind of got lost in the rest of the image. So I stayed with red. But if you have suggestions, I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah.
So that's the end of this. Well, that's all we have for this corridor. We'll navigate back to the first sheet for discussion.
Funny, is this the shortest entrance corridor in the county? Or maybe
Barracks Road is pretty short.
151, that little portion of it is pretty short too.
It's in the top 5 for sure.
It's pretty interesting. I mean, it's as short but significant as it is, since it's the primary entrance for everybody coming from the airport. Yeah, what a mishmash.
Yeah.
And I guess your point about zoning is a good one. That's not obviously the purview of this board, but I struggle a little bit to figure out how ultimately it's going to evolve in a coherent way when the zoning is as different across it.
Yeah.
So this is the view of the different zoning
Okay.
districts.
What's the dark blue? Rural or,
I think that's heavy industry.
oh, heavy industry, okay.
PDIP. Plan Development Industrial Park.
Okay.
I should disclose that I work at the UVA Foundation. And
Lewis
we're
and Clark
working
Drive.
on the North Fork project, so I don't want to say too much, but that's the North Fork
Okay.
parcel, that
Right.
PDIP.
Okay.
I'll just echo Dave's comment of how important this corridor is, or gonna continue to be
Right.
as it develops. It feels to me like it's recovering from a VDOT project. But like anticipating future growth, not saying that's a bad thing, but it's like it just hasn't grown in and, you know. But the infrastructure's there, the sidewalks, I think it's the document is really good. Well, I don't really
Yes,
have any
indeed.
edits on that.
Yeah. It's difficult though, cause like this corridor, I think there's like a lot of like room for improvement in terms of like the corridor itself and, we've kind of established a precedent with these pages of like documenting like what's there, and some of the entrance corridors that we have are like so rich with like excellent existing, you know, fabric that you really want to keep it, and you want to like explain to someone who would be looking at this book like why this corridor is unique, why we want to keep it that way. And then you have some other corridors, which I would say this one's an example of, where you like don't necessarily want to keep it the way it is now. And it's not really a specific criticism of this particular sheet, but it's like it's just kind of how we've engaged in this process of like what do you do in the corridors where you less want to emulate what's there and kind of like, you know, promote some kind of change in how it's going to look visually. So I just kind of toss that out there. I don't really have a good idea of like what you would
That's a great
do
point.
to
Yeah.
change it.
Yeah, no, I don't, well, echo, I mean, it's a wonderful spread capturing what is there in the current state and summarizes well things to avoid and to do. But it is provocative in terms of thinking about how important it is. And so I don't know whether it's like something whether the airport authority could just expand its authority or I don't know where we would make a recommendation to zoning and planning and the comp plan maybe to like update the overall structure of this area.
Yeah, those are all good comments. Mariah and I have been talking about how to deal with the corridors that are like this, the few that aren't maybe the best examples or don't have the best existing fabric in place. And so this effort is really with the end product, we're hoping will lead to, the list of fixes that need to be made in the guidelines document itself. So without, overstepping, without doing that in this document, trying to figure out a way to list out the points that need to be made to get us to where we need to be. So we're going to be talking about that some more and possibly bringing you some ideas on how to do that.
And in terms of the roadway itself, to Frank's point about recovering from a VDOT project, it does
I
seem
meant
like.
no
like, it would-
negative
yeah,
connotation.
No. I'm grateful for transportation in the
Yes.
Commonwealth, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just, even if it had planted median even, I think it's just so vast in terms of the asphalt. But we don't really have any interface with VDOT as the architectural review board, I don't think. But so it's in the top 5 for shortest. Where is it in the top whatever list for need of intervention?
I'm not sure, but I know that we have some really beautiful corridors.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Start ranking the neediest
Yeah.
corridors. Most
Put it
likely
right
to
on the sheet, yeah.
succeed.
This is our top 5 cars.
Maybe we could do a quintile.
See a graph as you go north or as you go south.
As you go west, as you go east.
Taro did the survey work on this one, so I think we'll want to follow up with him and see if he has any other suggestions, make sure we captured what he had intended.
All right, great. So let's see, we will move on to other business. First of all is the approval of the August 21st, 2023 minutes.
I'll move to approve those.
Anybody feel like making a motion?
Oh, sorry, I was too quiet.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
I'll also move.
Second.
All right, we could do a vote.
Yes. Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thank you.
lot. So before we go into the Presidio Apartments item, does anybody have any other items for discussion?
No.
All right, great. So Margaret will.
Sure, just wait for the display to come up. While we're waiting, there we go. So at our last meeting, there was a question about the project that when this board reviewed it, it was called Presidio Apartments. These are apartments that are near Martha Jefferson Hospital and along the interstate. And just there had been comments previously that there had been, it seemed to be the development was more visible than had been anticipated. So I've just pulled a few images together, have a few slides to show you. On the left in this slide are images from the applicant's submittal to the ARB. And I tried to pull some Google Street View images from similar locations for comparison. So I think you can see in
Those are
these
well done.
these slides that the retaining walls are significantly more visible after construction than was suggested in the earlier submittal. These images are showing the same, possibly a little more visibility for the buildings themselves as well. On this slide, we have Google Street View images on the left, and then just some images on the right, some aerial views of the development from the other direction. And in those on the right, the interstate is at the top or the back of the development, just to show you a little bit of sort of the layout of the development and where the trees do stand. And then in this slide, upper left corner, aerial view from the applicant in their earlier submittal. You can see there along the retaining walls, there are trees shown at each sort of terrace level. Those did not carry through to the approved plans. And we stopped focusing on that based on the perspectives that were submitted. We just didn't think that the retaining walls were going to be seen, so we didn't think they needed more landscaping to soften that view. And this is the site plan that was approved for the project. So I think what's happened is just the images that were put together, those on the left. I think they sort of overestimated some of the wooded area that was off-site and how that contributes to or doesn't contribute to screening. Also, the images on the right in this slide, the leaves, trees don't have all the leaves on them. I think if you drive by today, though, you do still see the retaining walls even with the leaves on the trees.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for assembling these materials and the views, which I think are very helpful at documenting the issue. I guess an open question I have for you and colleagues is there, obviously the applicant made representations about the visibility in their official submittal and presentation, which proved to be well, very different than the ultimate visibility. The site plan is one thing, and you're correct, it doesn't contain screening on site. I don't know, is there any normal action or recourse or enforcement or that we would have to ask the applicant to provide landscape or other means to match the development after the fact to their representations during the process of getting the certificate of appropriateness?
Those are good questions. We can certainly talk with our code compliance officers. I sort of looked to the site plan and assuming that the planting was done as it's shown here, are there other areas to add planting on site?
Right.
To help with that view, I'm not sure that anything's available on site.
And I guess I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested, Chris and Frank, in your perspective. I think it might be constructive to ask the applicant to appear before us and to explain the difference in the presentation and the reality, and just to register, just because I think it's important for applicants to know that we expect that their representations are good faith, accurate ones. And I would like also just to know who prepared the presentation, so that when applicants present materials to us in the future, we know, well, if they were involved in this or not.
Yeah. Although I think Margaret brings up a good point too,
Yeah.
like whether or not the project is missing anything that was shown
Right.
on the site plan too,
Yeah.
would be helpful because, to a certain extent, it's like one of our requirements is 3D imagery,
Right.
and to a certain extent, like we're kind of relying on the skill of the renderer to provide what we hope is kind of an accurate depiction. And to a certain extent, I think it's important that it be accurate, but at the same time, sometimes renderings can like stretch the truth one way
Oh,
or the
sure.
other.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just, you know, the skill of the renderer is also an issue. Like I've seen some renderings where I think like it actually looks worse than it would have looked
Right,
in
right,
reality.
yeah, yeah.
So, to me, I guess typically I'll take renderings with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
And kind of defer to the plan or when elevations are provided, you know, elevations, but I guess that's the only reason I guess if the board approved a package that included a site plan that wasn't compatible with the rendering images that they showed.
Yeah.
You know, then I guess if the renderings agreed with the site plan and what ended up getting built doesn't agree with either one of them, then clearly the applicant's at fault. But if the plan didn't agree with the rendering, then it's a little bit more gray as to like, you know, how was something approved that shouldn't have been approved by mistake, or was it an intentional kind of act of you know, deception, I guess, on the part of the applicant? So
We've had a similar issue on a much smaller scale for a sign application, and the drawings that were submitted, they're required to show the proposed sign on the building elevation, and those proportions looked fine. The sign got approved. The sign got installed, and the result was signs that were much bigger in proportion to the wall area. So but the size of the sign wasn't illustrated correctly on the rendered elevations. So we're trying to work through that now, but really it's the same issue, just a much smaller scale.
Right. Yeah, no, I think Chris's and Margaret's point is a good one. I think it would be good to know if there's anything in the site plan missing, because I think that would establish a clearer foundation. You know, I do take it as a caution to myself for reviewing future applications, because I think I did in this case probably trust far too much faith in the accuracy of the representation. Yes, yeah, but it just feels like something where, you know, certainly it's a disparity between presentation and reality. I would like to avoid occurring again in my experience. So I guess, so then it sounds like Margaret, it would be possible to ask a zoning enforcement officer to look at the landscape and assess if it matches the site plan.
Yes.
And I guess we do frequently, just thinking about future applications, we frequently ask for images with and without landscaping. And maybe it's just a good reminder to me to ask for that in these cases, so we can try and evaluate what's there if the trees go away.
One thing I'll just note, actually a couple of things. I'm sensitive to the fact that the applicant did gain a certificate of appropriateness and like went through the review, I think multiple reviews. Secondly, I don't know architecturally there's any, I mean, it's definitely more visible than the renderings, but at that distance, you know, I don't know that we would have gotten into a conversation on changing materials or changing the amount of blankness. I think the thing that stands out to me is the blankness and visibility of the retaining walls.
Exactly.
And so if you were gonna approach an applicant, you know, I think number one, it's perfectly acceptable to do the zoning compliance review. You know, that, and this alerted us to it, and so maybe that's, you know, why we're doing it earlier or why we're out there, sure, that makes total sense. But secondly, if there were a conversation with the applicant and it was, you know, would you be willing to do things in good faith to kind of, you know, mitigate the impacts of these retaining walls on the corridor? I think maybe would be a path forward. And maybe that's obvious, but we don't want to open up a review where we're like looking at the building and we're looking, you know, it's like this one thing.
Right.
We
no,
don't,
and
you know,
I appreciate those clarifications, Frank, and completely agree. And, you know, it's really just about a question of the visual impact overall because it's not buffered by landscape in the way we thought it would be.
Yeah.
It's not questions about the architecture. And I think you're right that it is chiefly the retaining wall and its blankness or retaining walls. There are a lot of them.
Yeah.
And you know, I was looking at the landscape plan that Margaret provided, and there are, you know, a lot of trees within the development that will gradually grow and, you know, so in a couple decades, I don't think it's a big deal. Right now,
it's tough to plant in between those walls because there's,
because the roots will destroy the structure.
yeah, the reinforcing grid that goes way back.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think little things like trailing vines or shrubs that grow over.
Well, and if
I don't think we need to fill it with trees, but things that break up that just mass of the same color and. You know, so I think there's creative, inexpensive ways to maybe mitigate some of this.
well, and if there were room at the base of the wall to plant some trees of substantial scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those could help to mitigate it too. Yeah, so I agree. It's a complex situation because obviously there's been a lot of review, a lot of process. I do still feel because the representations differ so significantly from the reality that it's important to find a way to
Definitely.
address it.
And I think not this drawing, but there's one drawing that showed just a plan view of this site in relation to 64. And in my mind, at least, I'm like, it's pretty far away from 64. But yeah, the grade, the big part of the story. That's really helpful to see, and all these images side by side and with and without leaves on the trees.
Okay, we'll keep working on it and we'll keep you posted.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Is that your portrait of a moose?
I'm sorry, what?
Is this your portrait of a moose?
It comes with the computer.
Okay, well, it's a nice one. I was gonna say, it's pretty close to take the picture yourself, though.
All right, any other items?
So our next meeting is scheduled for the 18th of this month. We do not have any regular review items scheduled for that date. Everything that's come in is available for staff level review. So I would recommend that we cancel that meeting and meet next on October. It's the 2nd. Yes, October 2nd.
Okay, no objection.
Sounds good to me. Yeah. All right, well, in that case, the next ARB meeting is scheduled for October 2nd, 2023. Frank and Dave, do you think?
I should be here. Yeah, currently.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
and me too, I think. So in that case, the meeting is adjourned until the next meeting on October 2nd. It's 2:29 and thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. Frank.